Welcome back to the show today. We were talking about trades in the NBA. What makes a good trade? What makes a bad trade? Well, actually, what makes a fair trade? What makes a trade equally good for both teams? We could take an example of like Pau Gasol going to the Lakers from the Grizzlies. That was a trade where people thought it was bad for the Grizzlies, but just good for the Lakers. Which in hindsight was actually fine for the Grizzlies, but great for the Lakers. In 2008, the Lakers traded away Kwame Brown, who was on an expiring contract. Kwame was already washed at this point. Then two role players in Javaris Crittendon and McKie. I only say their names because I don't want to just say two players because that feels disrespectful. The Lakers also traded away 2 first-round picks, and then in exchange they got Pau Gasol. Gregg Popovich said that the trade was incomprehensible. He said there ought to be a committee that vetoes bad trades. I know what you're about to say. There's not. But the Chris Paul trade, that's not what happened. So Popovich actually did end up sort of being right because the Lakers won 2 back-to-back championships with Pau. He ended up being the perfect player to play with Kobe Bryant. But hey, the Grizzlies actually kind of won too, because I didn't mention that the Grizzlies got the draft rights to Marc Gasol, incidentally Pau's brother. Marc ended up leading the Grizzlies' grit and grind era, one of the best runs the franchise has ever had. Marc made 2 All-NBA teams and he was a Defensive Player of the Year while he was a Grizzly. Now the Grizz never won a championship like the Lakers did, but all things considered, they came out alright. Now let's talk about a recent trade that I think is sort of rewriting its history. The Utah Jazz traded away Rudy Gobert in 2022, and it was the right time because the Jazz got back a lot of stuff for Rudy. They got 4 first-round picks and a pick swap, and they also got Vanderbilt and Malik Beasley, 2 good players. This was the biggest trade package in league history to this point. Everyone was laughing at Tim Connelly, the GM of the Timberwolves. I remember Bill Simmons saying this was the worst trade in NBA history. People were saying that Rudy Gobert is a one-dimensional player and that his contract was a little too pricey. They thought the Wolves were going to be bad and those picks that they gave away were going to be really high. So you know what? It's been 3 years, let's take a look back at this trade. Personally, the Timberwolves side did pretty well. Okay, but at first it started to look bad. The Timberwolves didn't have a really great first year with Rudy. They finished in the 8th seed and then Rudy punched Kyle Anderson in the chest. But maybe Kyle Anderson was being a The following 2 seasons, though, the Timberwolves made the Western Conference Finals. They hadn't made the Western Conference Finals in 20 years. So hey, even if you don't like Rudy, you have to admit the team has never been better. As for the Jazz, the team who presumably won the trade, they've had bad seasons ever since. They're tanking, though. They got Walker Kessler out of the deal. Everyone seems to love that guy. Keyonte George was Minnesota's pick in 2023, so the Jazz got him. He's okay. Then this year they got Will Riley, but they traded him to the Wizards. I don't even know what for. I'm serious, I couldn't even find the details of that trade. So all the picks haven't conveyed yet, but I think we're starting to realize that first-round picks might not necessarily be as valuable as we think. And occasionally, first-round picks can be valueless. Now, let's talk about a recent trade. Who won the Kevin Durant for Jalen Green and Dillon Brooks trade? First of all, the Rockets won the trade. They definitely won the trade. They won the trade because the Suns found themselves in a position that no one wants to be in. A desperate situation position. KD was not happy there, and there were already rumors that the Suns were going to trade him at the deadline, so it just wasn't going to happen. He wasn't coming back to the team. The Suns had to trade him, and they just had to take the best offer they could get. Problem is, the NBA is pretty good right now. The players in the NBA are really good, and the teams in the NBA are really good. Those players are also younger and cheaper than Kevin Durant. A player like, I don't know, Desmond Bane has way more kinetic value and potential value. That's why the trade package only came with 1 first-round pick for the Suns. And in reality, that pick was probably more compensation for taking Jalen Green's contract. I'm sorry, Jalen Green fans, but you know it's true. I'm not saying he's a bad player, he just was not a part of what the Rockets wanted to do. I don't like this expression, but the Rockets really killed 2 birds with 1 stone on this one. They got a consistent scorer and they got off the contract of an inconsistent scorer. The Rockets took advantage of the Suns' desperate situation. Think about it. Dillon Brooks, Jalen Green, and the 10th pick this year was the best possible package of all the teams for Kevin Durant. If it were any other team's star player, they just would have kept the star player. But the Suns didn't have a choice. It was just too awkward to have KD stay in Phoenix. It would have been almost as awkward as when he stayed at the Nets when he demanded a trade. So when it comes to luck in the NBA, I would say that the Brooklyn Nets are the weirdest team. They tend to have strokes of good luck that end up being bad luck in hindsight. A real monkey's paw situation. So the Nets traded for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce in 2013. This was a huge move for the Nets, and people thought it put them into championship contention. So the Celtics took back a bunch of garbage-ass contracts from the Nets. Guys like Keith Bogans, Chris Humphries, Marshawn Brooks, just NBA contracts of no consequence. So everyone at the time was wondering what Danny Ainge, general manager of the Celtics, was thinking. Because people thought that the picks that the Celtics were getting from the Nets were going to be really bad picks. They thought the Nets were going to be good. good. But Danny Ainge saw the future. He saw the Nets sucking. Because one of those first round picks ended up being Jaylen Brown with the 3rd pick overall. Imagine being called during the lottery that your team got the 3rd pick, but you've already traded it away to the Celtics. Or imagine being at the lottery and the 1st pick ends up being your team, but you've traded that pick to the Celtics as well. That happened too in 2017. Now, the Celtics did trade down to get Jason Tatum, but that makes it even worse. Because Tatum's had a 50 times better career than Markelle Fultz, who was the 1st pick. So when a trade goes down, everyone criticizes it because they think they're smarter than one of the GMs involved. But the reality is they might be, but it might not be the GM they think it is. So it's been a couple months. Let's talk about the Luka trade again. So when the Luka trade went down, everyone thought the Mavs got fleeced, right? And most people probably still do. But I think the biggest thing to think about in this trade is that no matter what the Mavs got back, people were going to be upset in Dallas because they loved Luka. They were devastated because he was the face of their franchise. He'd taken them to the finals. He'd been first team All-NBA for like 5 years. He was going to be a statue guy. The city loved him and he loved the city back. It didn't matter if the Mavs got 3 first-round picks and AD back. They were going to be pissed. Because personally, I'm of the opinion that for only dumb luck, the Mavs actually ended up on the better end of the deal. AD and Kyrie tore enough cartilage in their limbs to get Cooper Flag. But I'm sure Nico Harrison didn't predict that. So now the Mavs have a future face of their franchise and maybe, I don't know, maybe the future face of the league. But at the same time, if Kyrie and AD hadn't gotten hurt, they wouldn't have Cooper Flag, but they also would have had a pretty solid squad for the playoffs this year. And another very important thing to point out that my fellow businessmen know, the Mavs were due to give Luka that super mega max extension that Shea got this year, but it would have been for even more money than Shea got. It doesn't really matter how good a player is on one of those contracts. He's going to severely limit the option a team has to make moves. So I think it's going to be 6 or 7 years before we really know exactly who won this trade. But at this point, I'm not really sure who's come out on top yet. So now, personally, I think NBA trades are more in the business of headlines and clicks. Everyone wants to know, oh, how many picks did that guy get traded for? A player's value is based on how many picks were traded for him, when it doesn't really matter. Because the truth is, a lot of protected picks really aren't anything. Some picks are so heavily protected that if the pick ends up in the lottery, they don't even get it. Some of these second-round picks even have protections on them. But the headline still reads 5 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. So the real trick for a GM is to know what these picks are most likely going to look like. So let's look at the Desmond Bane trade real quick. So the picks that the Grizzlies got for Desmond Bane are these. The 16th pick in this year's draft, which is Young Hunsen, who they kicked to the Blazers. Okay. Then they got the Magic's own pick in 2028 and 2030, which I'd have to imagine isn't going to be very good. I think the Magic are going to be a good team. If I had to guess, I think those picks would end up in the high teens, 20s. The only real pick of any substance would be the Suns 2026 pick, but even that pick is swapped like 4 or 5 times, so there's really no chance that it's going to be very valuable. Don't get me wrong, I think this is still a really good return package for the Grizzlies, but on paper, it looks remarkably bullish for Desmond Bane on the Magic side, and I don't really think it is. The Magic already have a bunch of young players on cheap contracts. They don't need any more. They need a guy who can knock down threes in a game. They need that desperately, and that player is Desmond Bane. Do you know he's 6'4", by the way? I don't know, he just doesn't seem that tall to me. All right, thank you for being here. Like the video. I forgot to say like the video last time, and that was a mistake. I should have said that. Join the Patreon, leave a comment, all that stuff. Patreon, I don't know what I'm going to talk about this week. Probably some free agency stuff. God bless all my patrons. I love you the most. Be good to your mammies, eat a corn dog.